up your holy name. Thank you for all you're doing and all you're going to do. We thank you for what you have for us to hear today, Lord. I pray to help us in all areas and all ways.
Yes.
Thank you for help and protection in all aspects. Thank you for guidance. Thank you for fellowship. Jesus, we praise your holy name and lift you up. Amen. Anyway, okay. I shall not be moved. Psalm 16:8 says, I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. That correlates with 1 Corinthians 13:11 through 12. It says, when I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. A blind person who walks with a sighted person generally, and I'm saying generally, I realize this is a generalization, it's not always the case, but generally holds on to the sighted person with their dominant hand, which is usually their right hand, holding to the sighted person's left elbow. So they walk with their hand in their elbow. And that's generally how they walk with them. I understand not everybody's the same. Yeah. The sighted person sends a lot of information through their elbow without even having to say anything. When you're walking, no, you don't elbow them in the face. No, like for example, if you're getting ready to go through a narrow spot or in between a crowd, it's a natural movement anyway, but you tuck your elbow back a little bit, and then the blind person knows to kind of step behind you. And they'll walk behind that person until you move your elbow back out, and then they can swing back around.
How do they know?
Practice.
Cue.
It's just a cue, and that's also a natural body language thing, because if you're getting ready to go through someplace narrow, you're going to have a tendency to kind of turn your elbow.
I mean, how does the blind person know that they move them?
They just practice. And they teach them that, but that's a recognition of a natural bodily thing.
It's kind of a natural thing.
And also, if you go to step up or down a step, they can tell how tall or low the step is by how far your elbow moves up and down.
That's neat.
So when you're walking, and usually you're going to say, hey, there's a step, but you step down, then they know how far roughly to step. So there's a lot of information that's transmitted even without having to say anything. In other words, if the sighted person is halfway any good at leading the blind person, the blind person can walk without having to worry about too much of anything. Now, the sighted person has to be aware of uneven terrain, of things that might trip somebody up. But as long as you're walking in an area that's generally level, smooth, whatever, a blind person can walk with you and pretty much just walk as though they're, they don't have to worry about having a cane and all that stuff. We, as humans, are pretty much, we're completely blind to the future. We anticipate things, we expect things, but we're really blind to the future. We don't know what's going to happen. Fortunately, God is not. If we put him always before us, as it says up there in Psalms, and we hold his elbow as he leads us, then we'll not be moved. In other words, we won't stumble or trip or fall or get stuck. We'll be able to get through anything because he's guiding us. Sometimes life's journey is so fraught with danger that God simply carries us. It's much safer that way. Which reminds me of a situation that happened at a large church in West Virginia. The pastor had one of his parishioners cover the entire platform with steel traps. Set steel traps, all sizes. Like fur traps.
Bear traps.
Okay. Dangerous traps. There was a pathway to walk through it. Now, that same parishioner had a 5 or 6 year old son. The pastor had him brought up and set at the other end of the platform and blindfolded. He said, I'm going to guide you through. with my words. I'm going to guide him through telling him where to step and where not to step. And of course, everybody in the congregation was doing what Jasmine's doing, going, "Ooh, you can't do that." And they're all like, but Pastor, you can't do that. You know, they were all freaking out. This, yeah, I'm sure there was probably some people who actually spoke out, because I know some of the people in that church, and they're vocal. He said, or I could have his father come up
That's good.
and just carry him through the traps. So he did that. And his dad, who first of all had placed all the traps, knew where all the traps were, knew where the pathway was, wasn't blindfolded, just picked up the 6-year-old. No. Just picked up the blindfolded 6-year-old and carried him to the pastor.
Right.
That's so good.
There's no danger.
Well, there's minimal danger.
I suppose you can get dropped, but it's
Or
not
stumble,
likely
fall,
that
trip.
the dad's
Well,
going to
the
drop
Lord
his
let you
son,
drop your
you know,
son onto a
on a flat flat. Anyway,
if it's in his will.
God usually leads us like the blind man. It's not necessarily so much what he says, but just the promptings. He prompts us to move in and out, left and right, up and down. Not so much with words, but just if we're have him before us and we're holding on to him, those promptings will show us where to go. Sometimes he actually says, okay, this is too much. I'm going to pick you up and carry you. Now, those times, not only we're blind, but we're also deaf. We can't hear anything. We don't get any sense of what direction we're going because we're being carried.
What danger we're passing.
We can't see the danger that we're passing, but we also can't see where we're going. We don't know where we are. Those are times when we have to be in complete trust. And unfortunately, human nature, for the most part, when we find ourselves in those positions, we want to struggle, we want to fight, we want to pull the blindfold off, we want to get down, we want to have some control. And God's saying, no, just stay right where you are. It's kind of like Jesse the other day said he moved a block and there were 2 little toads hiding under it. And he said he picked them up and they hopped onto his hand, so then he covered them up just like this. So they wouldn't hop off and get hurt because he was going to move them. So he picked them up where there was danger if they were to drop off his hand. So he had them covered. They couldn't see. It was dark. And they also, because of that darkness, they don't move much. And they took them over someplace safe and put them down. Well, God does that to us. A lot of times he's holding us in the hollow of his hand. And we can't see or hear or sense anything. And if we're not careful, we'll start freaking out. We'll start struggling. We'll start fighting. And he's like, I'm not going to let you go because you're just going to hurt yourself. But we don't necessarily always realize that. Now, if somebody can be wise and tell us, hey, God's just moving you right now in the hollow of his hand, and we can accept that, then we can just come to rest. If we can't, sometimes it helps if somebody's told you about it so you can go, oh, I wonder if this is one of those times where I just have to trust God and just rest. When most of the time it is. So, because God doesn't want to keep us in the dark, but he's protecting us from dangers. It's like, give me those glasses things. They don't have yeah. It's like these eclipse glasses. They're not meant to keep you in the dark, but they keep you from seeing anything. If I put them on, I can't see anything because I'm not looking at the sun right now. If I look at the sun, I can see the sun, and that's it. Mm-hmm. They're not meant to keep you in the dark. They're just meant to keep you from hurting yourself. Mm-hmm. And so, as a result, that's the same thing that God does to us. He keeps us from hurting ourselves, but sometimes it feels like he's putting us in the dark. So if we can hold on to that scripture from Psalms, I've set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Even if we're just in the hollow of his hand and we're holding on to him, we may not have any sense of where we're going, where we're being led, what we're supposed to be doing. But we have a sense of growing, a sense of protection, of shielding, of being protected and shielded. So we have to remember that we can't. It's best not to fight and struggle in those situations, because it's way easy to fight and struggle. It's way easy. I mean, I can remember years ago one time, I was in such a place trying to figure out what to do. I was like, what does God want me to do? Where I was in a nowhere land. I mean, it was almost like a void. I was in a limbo, and I was like, what am I supposed to do? God, where do you want me to go? Which direction do you want me to take? How do you want me to move? And somebody said, Jonathan, God's just got you in the hollow of his hand, and you can't see anything because of that. And I was like, oh, okay, I can deal with that. I can accept that. But I felt like I was just so far separated from God that I couldn't sense his movements anymore. I felt like I was isolated. See, sometimes when we're in that place where we're in the hollow of his hand, we feel isolated. We're not, but we are alone, and we're in the dark, and we can't see, and we can't hear, and we can't taste, or any of our other senses work. So the only thing that can work is trust. We just have to trust God. Because if we start struggling, we're just going to hurt ourselves. Has anybody ever held a baby bird or a little bird in the palm of your hand? Have you ever held a little bird? And when you keep them, if you hold them like this, they're going to struggle, they're going to flap, they're going to fight, they're going to try to get away. But if you can get them and cover them up just like this, they just don't move.
I'm safe.
Well, they feel both. I'm not sure if they're scared or feel safe, but I do know that I've held a bird like that and held them long enough that you could feel because their little heart rate was going. When you first got them, they were like, a million beats a minute, and it actually calms down. So I know that they feel, they're like, okay, I'm not getting hurt. I guess I'm okay.
They can't breathe in here.
Yeah, they can breathe. Yes, they can breathe. So
It's physiological.
that's how God wants us to be.
Right.
He wants us to not struggle, but to just rest when we're in those times. Now, the other times, he wants us to hold on. He wants us to follow. He'll give us the promptings. He'll give us the guidance just by moving that elbow in and out. And we're walking along. And we're not really blind. Reverend Helm used to say that when we really follow Jesus, we should be right here at his back. That's the safest place to be, is with your nose right between his shoulder blades. Well, you can't see a whole lot if you walk right behind somebody and you have your nose. I mean, Jasmine, if you walk right behind Rob and you have your nose touching his back, how much can you see other than green? Because he's always wearing green. So you can't see anything but green. But you're also, but also you can be pretty sure that he's not going to lead you someplace that you're going to get hurt. Well, he better not. He'd have to answer to a lot of people if he did.
Yeah.
So think about that. So God does the same thing, and we may not be actually blind to where God's taking us, but if we're walking closely enough to him, we're not going to see anything but him. We're not necessarily going to see the path that we're going down. We're just going to see him. And that's really all we need to see. Because then he can take us up, down, sideways, left, right, cross over, teleport here to there, whatever, and we'll be all right. But when it gets, to the time where it's dangerous and he puts us in the hollow of his hand, that's when you really have to trust. Because before, at least we're walking, we think, okay, I can stop walking if I want to. Won't do us much good, but we can. But when we're in the hollow of his hand, it's like we have no control at all. And except, I will say this, if you say, God, I want out, he'll be like, all right. But he'll let you out right there in the middle of wherever you are, which may not be the safest place to be,
So then you have to ask him to pick you back up.
It's like, sorry. I was wrong. So just think about that this week. Think about always having God before you so you're not moved. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not moving, but it means that we're not moved by other people, by other situations, by battles, by struggles. The enemy can't move us because we always have him before us. We're holding on to him. We're not going to be moved. That's not to say that we're not moving. We're just not going to be knocked off course. We're not going to be
moved off his will.
Yeah, moved out of his will. Nothing can separate me from God.
Amen.
So consider that this week. Any other feedback?
After you close, I'd like to ask for a prayer request.
Okay.
It's almost kind of like, you can put blinds on horses sometimes.
The blinders, yeah?
Yeah. And you got those on, and sometimes they keep you from seeing stuff that you don't really need to see.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily that you shouldn't see it, but just that it keeps your focus.
Could be distracting, could be, whatever.
It doesn't hurt anything to have those on sometimes, because that way you can just see what you're focused on. Straight and narrow, instead of being like, oh, well, there's a little path, what goes down that way? Or, oh, there's a little path, what goes that way? Or, oh, there's a wolf over there, but I can't see it, so it doesn't matter anyway, You know what I mean? Keeps your focus.
It's staying away because God's keeping me protected.
Sometimes you can see, but you don't see everything, and if you see everything, sometimes it causes more problems.
Right.
If you just have that very narrow view.
Right.
Some people don't like that, but that's not always a bad thing. So.
Any other feedback?
Oh, one other thing I just remembered. I remember holding a little critter in my hand one time, and this is just another way of looking at it. God's not gonna hold you until you smother. Because
right.
I smothered a little critter one time by accident when I was a kid. I held it like this. I had a little toad in my hand. I caught it. It was like this big, teeny tiny little toad. And I was just carrying it around because I liked it.
You probably squished it.
Well, I didn't squish it. I just held my hand like this, and it got too hot, and there wasn't enough airflow in there for it, and it died. And I felt really bad. And ever since then, I've always thought about that. I was like, well, I need to be careful about how you handle little critters like that. You're jealous. And just thinking about God's not going to put you in his hand and smother you.
Right.
He'll make sure you have the nutrients you need and the air and the light.
Right.
But if you don't want to smother anybody.
It's not going to crush you.
If you hold on to somebody too tight, sometimes you might smother them.
Right.
And it's not with bad intention. It's just because
Didn't do it on purpose. It's
you
not like
liked it or whatever.
it's not like I hurt it. It's just I loved it. I thought it was a cute little toad, and I ended up killing it because I was a little kid and didn't know what was going to happen. So, but God won't do that to you.
I'm glad he won't do that.
He's not going to smother you.
Otherwise, he'd do that to all of us. Big hug.
Right. Like, was it Elmira on the Animaniacs?
Yeah.
I love it and pet it and call it Georgia. And squeeze it.
It was a Sasquatch with.
Well, that was that too. But there was a girl on Animaniacs who did the same thing, basically. All right. Well, Jesus, we thank you and praise you and bless you. We lift up your holy name. You're worthy of all praise and glory and honor. Thank you for what you're doing, what you're going to do. I pray help us to get this message into our hearts. Thank you for what for your guidance, Lord. We praise you and bless you. Amen.